Can you imagine beginning your prayer with a drag from a marijuana cigarette? Can you imagine being led by cannabis, not the Bible, nor the Quran, nor any sacred text, to what is called spiritual peace, in the heart of the United States of America, where religious freedom meets extreme individual lifestyle? Churches have emerged that resemble nothing we know. Their walls are covered with strange psychedelic graphics, and their hymns are electronic or reggae music. And their holiest symbol? The cannabis plant. They call it the tree of life, the mediator of cosmic consciousness, or simply our gift from God. And while marijuana, in the eyes of federal law, is considered a prohibited drug, these churches insist that they use it as a means of drawing closer to God. So what exactly is happening inside these churches? Are they genuine spiritual rituals, or merely a legal cover to justify substance use? And can a controversial plant transform into a center of worship? In this documentary, we open the doors of the sacred cannabis churches in America, and we dive into a world that blends religion and drugs, between meditation and smoke, and between faith and suspicion. This is not the story of a plant. It is the story of the boundaries of faith, when they mix with the heavy scent of cannabis. Stay with us until the end, and do not forget to support us by liking the video and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any new content. For thousands of years, the cannabis plant resided in the shadows, used in folk medicine, and invoked in the spiritual rituals of ancient civilizations, from India to Egypt, and from the Maya to China. It was not merely a plant, but rather a symbol of healing, and a secret of the secrets of deep meditation. As time passed, the perception of cannabis changed. In the modern Western world, particularly in the United States, the plant took on a different face, the face of crime, the forbidden, and deviance. Years of political and legal campaigns classified cannabis as a dangerous narcotic substance and drove millions of its users into prisons. However, in contrast, there were always small groups moving in the opposite direction, seeing in cannabis not a danger, but rather salvation, not a sin, but rather purity. And with the beginning of the 21st century, and in light of cultural shifts and legal openness towards the legalization of cannabis, in some states, new, unconventional movements emerged, restoring to the plant its ancient status. But, in the language of the modern age, churches appeared. Yes, real churches, legally registered, with buildings, leaders, and followers. But the essence of their faith was not centered around a prophet or a holy book, but around a plant, cannabis. These churches do not follow Orthodox Christianity, nor Judaism, nor even Buddhism, but rather present themselves as an alternative path for the searching soul, a path that does not impose doctrines, but rather unleashes the senses and opens the doors of perception. In the view of their followers, cannabis is not a means of entertainment, but a spiritual tool, used to reach inner peace and activate what they call cosmic energy. It is like a key that opens the door to the unseen, a barrier that is lifted between the body and the soul. Thus, and under a legal cover that allows freedom of belief, these churches began to grow in silence. Some of them hold prayers that include group smoking, and others build complete rituals around the moment of lighting the first joint. Each community adapts the plant as it wishes, but they are united by one common denominator: the belief that cannabis not only alters consciousness, but purifies the soul. In the spring of the year 2017, and among the streets of the city of Denver in the state of Colorado, the doors of a strangely shaped building were opened. It does not carry a cross nor a minaret, but rather is covered with overlapping surrealist drawings, with garish colors scattered like hallucinated dreams on the walls. This building, which was previously a traditional Christian church, was transformed into what its founders called the International Church of Cannabis. This project is led by a man named Steve Burke, a social activist and a thinker outside the usual frameworks. He does not claim to be a prophet, nor does he assert that he possesses the absolute truth. But he, along with a small group of believers in one single idea, who called themselves the elevationists, decided to grant cannabis its spiritual status as a tool for inner elevation. Inside this church, you do not find the arranged wooden pews, nor the altars, nor the hymns. Rather, you witness an open space, its walls surrounding you with artistic paintings that resemble the world of dreams, while in the background, dreamy electronic music melodies flow, paving the way to another world, a world that transcends the senses. The rituals in this church are not loud nor full of oratory, but rather begin with near-complete silence. The attendees gather in a meditation circle, close their eyes, and begin deep breathing exercises. Then, at a moment agreed upon without words, each lights their own marijuana joint, and the journey of perception begins. The smoke fills the void, not as a mere physical trace, but as a symbolic bridge towards what they call inner peace or cosmic vision. After a period of meditation, a voluntary discussion session is held, in which the attendees share their visions, their reflections, and perhaps some spiritual confessions that the cannabis smoke has birthed within them. However, this project did not pass unnoticed in the eyes of the law. The church, although it is a registered religious institution, did not obtain a license for cannabis use in public events. Federal authorities still classify cannabis as a prohibited substance on the federal level, even if its use is permitted in some states. Therefore, the rituals are carried out with a degree of caution, in private events, restricted to members, and under unofficial surveillance by the local police. Despite that, the church did not close its doors, nor was it brought to trial. The American Constitution, with its protection of religious freedom, keeps the door ajar for such new spiritual entities. In the heart of the city of San Jose in the state of California, and on one of the streets that suggests nothing out of the ordinary, stands a strangely structured building known as the Coachella Valley Church. From the outside, it does not resemble traditional churches, nor mosques, nor any places of worship that people are accustomed to seeing. Rather, it is an artistic mixture of Afro-Caribbean symbols and Rastafarian decorations, topped with flags in the colors red, yellow, and green, colors that have been associated for years with reggae culture and the deep belief that cannabis is not merely a plant, but a sacred secret. This church was founded with a spirit inspired by the Rastafarian movement, that philosophy which arose in Jamaica in the 20th century and merged Christianity with African spirituality, adding to them a firm belief that cannabis is a means of direct communication with the Supreme Creator. Inside the church, cannabis is viewed as a spiritual medicine, not for physical healing only, but for purifying the soul and opening the inner vision. The atmosphere inside the temple is akin to a sensory journey. Reggae music blends softly in the background, accompanying the words of prayers recited in a slow tone, closer to hymns. The scent of incense rises with the cannabis smoke, in a communal ritual that transcends mere smoking and takes the form of sanctification. No one is allowed to enter and participate in the rituals without carrying a licensed medical card for cannabis use, a step the church takes as a form of legal protection and as evidence of seriousness, separating genuine faith from exploitation. However, the path was not paved with peace. Since its establishment, the Coachella Valley Church has faced repeated waves of legal threats. While California laws permit the use of cannabis for medical purposes, there remain strict restrictions on its sale or distribution, even if that is done under a religious cover. The authorities have accused the church more than once of hiding commercial activity under a religious cloak, and attempted to close it under the pretext of violating licensing law. But those in charge of the church have remained clinging to their position, that they are not a store nor a pharmacy, but a place of worship, and that cannabis, like wine in other religious rituals, should be treated as a sacred ritual element, not as a commercial commodity. In the heart of the city of Indianapolis, And in one of the corners of the contemporary American scene, a strange religious entity unlike any other was born. The first Church of Cannabis was not founded by inspiration from a spiritual vision, but rather as a sarcastic political reaction. Then, without anyone realizing it, the joke transformed into something resembling a creed. In the year 2015, after the state of Indiana passed a law known as the Religious Freedom Law, a law through which citizens were permitted to refuse dealing with others if that conflicted with their religious beliefs, the activist and musician Bill Levin decided to test this law in his own way. He founded a church claiming that cannabis is a ritual element in its religion and raised a simple slogan: live with love, harm no one, and celebrate life. What began as a sharp political critique attracted massive media attention, then, in a surprising manner, began to attract genuine followers. People who were not looking for theological complexities, nor for strict systems, but rather for a place that appreciates simplicity, celebrating existence, and accepting others. Inside this church, there are no rigid rituals, no beliefs imposed on anyone. There is no sacred law, but rather a document called the Green Gospels, a set of ethical principles that call for love, honesty, tolerance, and respect for life. Cannabis in Bill Levin's church is not mandatory, nor is it considered a means to enlightenment or salvation, but rather a symbolic element in the ritual of thanksgiving, used to celebrate life and not to disconnect from it. Whoever wanted to light their joint did so, and whoever did not wish to, no one forced them. But the state was not ready to accept the joke as reality. When the church submitted a formal request to allow smoking cannabis during the masses, the authorities refused, citing that state law still criminalizes the use of recreational cannabis. The church filed several constitutional cases through which it tried to prove that banning cannabis within religious rituals conflicts with the religious freedom law itself, but it did not succeed legally. Nevertheless, the church remained standing. It transformed from a protest cry into a real space for meeting, meditation, laughter, and discussion. In a simple hall, Bill Levin stands every week wearing a colorful shirt, smiling at a group of different faces: young people, retirees, artists, dissenters from other churches. All of them came looking for a place that accepts them as they are. The First Church of Cannabis is not only a story about religious freedom or about cannabis, but it is a story about postmodern America, where sarcasm may begin as a joke, but sometimes it ends as a religion. Deep in the rural heart of Northern California, far from the noise of the cities and the authorities of scrutiny, the rituals of a church known as the Cannabis is Life Church, or as some call it, the United Cannabis Ministry, are held. This group is led by a man named Reverend Steve Cherms, who does not wear a clerical robe nor carry a cross, but rather stands simply in the middle of a room filled with smoke, speaking quietly about inner peace and cosmic light. There are no bells or hymns in this place. Rather, Sunday begins with what resembles a group meditation session, interspersed with sessions of collective cannabis inhalation, in an atmosphere closer to ancient Gnostic rituals than to any known religious ceremony. The Reverend and his followers believe that cannabis is the tree of life mentioned in the Torah, and they connect it to mysterious rituals said to have been practiced in ancient religions of the Middle East. The plant is depicted here as a spiritual bridge, not just as a botanical substance, but as a means of communication with the true God, according to their beliefs. However, entry into this church is not available to everyone. It is required that a person possesses a legal medical card for cannabis use, which indicates an attempt to give a superficial legitimacy to their activities. Mobile phones and photography are also prohibited inside the rituals, reflecting a desire to maintain the isolation and, perhaps, the mystery that envelops their congregation. And although the external appearance might seem like a relaxation center or a private club, those in charge insist that it is a place for spiritual healing, not for commerce or leisure. But the question marks remain suspended. Is it a religion, or a cover, or an escape from reality under the guise of holiness? Although the American Constitution guarantees freedom of belief, the legal reality for churches that rely on cannabis places them in a legal gray area. The federal government still classifies cannabis as a Schedule I narcotic, meaning in the same legal classification as heroin, which makes its use in religious rituals a perpetual point of contention. In this context, these churches find themselves besieged between the text of the law and the spirit of liberties. They claim that their rituals are protected under the First Amendment of the Constitution, which guarantees freedom of religion. But on the other hand, the state sees that these rituals, especially if they include the sale of cannabis or its use outside of medical frameworks, represent a clear violation of the law. Other issues also intersect, such as the protection of minors, as the state imposes strict restrictions on the entry of non-adults into such rituals, a measure that most churches approve of as a form of superficial compliance, although doubts remain about the actual application within some of these gatherings. Thus, these churches continue to practice their rituals under intense scrutiny and often remain on the edge of the law, not officially recognized nor completely legally prosecuted. A state that embodies the deep tension between freedom of faith and the authority of the state, and between what is considered a creed and what is deemed a transgression. For some, these churches are nothing more than a trick to evade taxes or a means to circumvent drug laws. They are not subject to the strict financial oversight imposed on commercial activities, nor are they classified among licensed cannabis sales locations. Therefore, a number of critics see them as nothing but spiritual deception. But on the other hand, there are those who see in them an alternative space for expressing spiritual anxiety or psychological pain. Some followers say they have found in them something of tranquility or even salvation. Stories are told of people who suffered from severe depression, chemical addiction, or psychological trauma, and found in these rituals personal solace, not necessarily religious, but closer to group therapy. However, these narratives are not enough to absolve the entire scene. The difference between searching for peace and exploiting beliefs for material or recreational purposes remains fragile and ambiguous. A church that does not possess a clear theology nor an agreed-upon religious reference can easily transform into a mixture of chaos and experimentation, even if it wears the mask of spirituality. Conclusion: people may differ in their understanding of religion, in their interpretation of rituals, and in their ways of approaching God. But for spirituality to be reduced to a roll of smoke, and for cannabis to become an alleged gateway to salvation, that is not religious freedom, but rather a trivialization of the sacred. The cannabis churches in America do not redefine religion, but rather strip it of its meaning. They take the human need for tranquility and clothe it in a false garment of fabricated rituals and concepts, making it appear as worship, while it is, in its essence, merely spiritual manipulation and psychological deception. It is a reflection of a society that confuses escape with freedom, addiction with enlightenment, and loss with the search for self. And in an era where the boundaries between truth and falsehood are distorted, such churches become a sign of a greater crisis, the crisis of the spirit in a civilization that has lost its compass. For here, God is not worshipped, but rather replaced with a plant. And here we come to the end of today's video. Do not miss the opportunity to follow all that is new by subscribing to the channel and activating the bell button so that all that is new reaches you.